Hello, it's a third line day. We are in gate 53, the gate of beginnings, of development, and the third line, which is called practicality. When there is no lifetime learning, no introduction line, then the line itself is describing genetic material which is operating in us right from the moment we arrive on this plane. So here we go straight into the exaltation. In its most natural position, the concentration on avoiding conflict to ensure protection and continued development. The pressure to eliminate conflict in order to develop. These are people who want to start things, but they don't know that there's somebody on the other end, and they're not going to be able to start anything until they meet somebody on the other side, when they bang into them. And then they realize all of a sudden that the most important thing is human interaction. Avoiding conflict works in two ways. There are people who will only begin things when they have harmonic relationships with others. This is a collective stream after all, so that's a big part of that. And there are people who will leave and walk out on things because it is not harmonic. And then they will start something new in order to get away from the conflict. These are the kind of people, when they're in something, the movement towards tension or conflict that they might feel in their environment, that sends them off, and they just want to get out at any cost. So they're driven, they are moved to find the right kind of collective force to work with. The first three lines, lower trigram, they don't really know much about the other side, if anything at all. The third line a little bit because it's bumping into things, but the 1 and 2 know. It's always a surprise. It's always that trial and error, always full of so-called mistakes. All of the lower trigram, they're a bit stunned when they meet the other side. It's like whatever they're carrying with them, all of a sudden they forget that, because it's like, wow, there's something here. I'm not alone in my little personal destiny. There's actually something here. And this is quickly followed by, oh my God, I'm going to be dependent on them because I'm not going to be able to start anything unless I can get along with them. The third line is very different from the first and second lines. The 1 and the 2, they're the basic binary. But the third it's carrying different information. It's getting ready, because it's unstable, like the fourth line, it's getting ready to transition. And as such, it bangs into the other all the time. So here there is the sort of most natural avoiding conflict. And that's what they're good at, in a way. It's their secret. If they can avoid conflict, if they can start something new, then great. But then what is the theme of a third line? These are lines of adaptation. And they operate through a wave of bonds made and broken. Trial and error. It's a classic position, really. Ra said that this is why this line is exalted, because it's a classic position. You're in a gate of starting things, and you're a third line that loves to start things and then stop and start something else. And starting something doesn't necessarily mean finishing something. It's important to keep this in mind. You might have gate 42, in which case finishing something might be part of your process. But success in terms of starting things and entering into them correctly so that there is the energy for finishing them, well, that finishing might be reaching the point of delegation, passing that task on to somebody else so that they can finish it. In the detriment, we have the unconscious provoking of conflict that logically threatens security and development, energy which provokes conflict and threatens development. These are people who say, I'm going to start something new, no matter what you think. And they bang into somebody, and instead of making the best out of what they can socially with the other, trying to learn how to deal with the other, they simply say, well, they're going to do it anyway. To hell with you, I don't need you, I'll find somebody else. And then they'll go off and bump into somebody else. And there's nothing wrong with that, of course, if that's really their nature. Then they'll see, if they're following their own nature, they will be able to start things themselves and not be dependent on others. The third line deals with the theme of trial and error, and it's very much in harmony with the whole process of maturation. because maturation is basically a trial and error process, going through one cycle and the next and learning from experience what works and what doesn't. So the grounding is through the 54-3, which is covert interaction. If there is the possibility of conflict, maybe some covert interaction is called for to avoid it. Well, that's one interpretation. It might not need avoiding, of course, or maybe you want some conflict, so you want to get into the covert interaction to see where your best chance of some conflict is. What would you say about this? Would you have an interpretation you'd like to share? The moon is still in gate 7 and it moves into gate 4 at 16:59. This is the gate of youthful folly, the gate of formalizations, logical gate in the ajna. It's a need to understand things, to answer the doubts and questions of the collective, coming up with concepts that may or may not have validity, that need to be tested over and over again. And this is a force that is much better used as an outer authority for others, rather than trying to find answers to your own processes and your own doubts. And then the moon moves into gate 29 at 3:57 tomorrow morning. This is the abysmal, the gate of perseverance, the gate of saying yes. And this leads to the 46. So this is where we can see that saying yes needs some commitment, because we're in the channel of discovery here. So commitment and perseverance to that new discovery. You don't want to start off on the path of discovering something new only to discover that you have to bail out because you didn't go into it correctly. So strategy and authority, of course, are going to play their part here, as they do everywhere. Thank you very much for joining me on this line, this gate and line, the 53-3. We will be back tomorrow for the 53-4. And so until then, go gently. And I hope wherever you are, you're having a very beautiful time. And I send you love.